Order. Welcome to meeting number 21, I hear an echo, of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3H and the motion adopted on Wednesday, September 17, 2025, the committee is resuming its study of the challenges posed by artificial intelligence and its regulation. I would like to welcome our witnesses for today on Zoom. We've got Mr. Frederic Gonzalo, who is a consultant, speaker, trainer in digital marketing and artificial intelligence. Mr. Gonzalo, welcome to committee. We've also got from the Canadian Shield Institute for Public Policy, Vaz Bednar, a managing director. Welcome back to committee. You were here a year ago today, so we're celebrating an anniversary. Isn't that wonderful? And then Dr. Matthew Demota is the senior policy researcher as well. Mr. Gonzalo, I'm going to start with you for up to 5 minutes to address the committee. Just before you do begin, I decided today to consolidate the three witnesses together. We have an hour and a half. If it's the will of the committee to go a little bit longer, we will have the ability to have extra time. But as it stands right now, we're going to finish roughly around 6 o'clock. Okay? So, Mr. Gonzalo, go ahead, please.
Bonjour, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Hello, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to contribute to this essential discussion on the challenges posed by the regulation of artificial intelligence. For more than 30 years, I've been working with small and medium-sized businesses, particularly in the tourism, culture, private education, and municipal services sectors in Quebec. These are often companies with fewer than 100 employees that want to adopt AI to increase efficiency, but who don't always know where to start, what to use, or what risks to avoid. The first observation that I have is that regulatory uncertainty is paralyzing. Small businesses do not have legal teams or cybersecurity specialists. They want to do the right thing, but they do not always understand in concrete terms what is allowed, what is not recommended, or what could become non-compliant. A framework that is too technical or too rigid risks creating a digital divide between organizations that have the means to move forward and those that do not. My second observation is that there must be a balance between privacy protection and innovation. Today, small businesses use tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Canva AI without knowing exactly how their data is being processed. Policies change rapidly, interfaces evolve, and it is difficult for them to keep up. A set of simple, visual Canadian guidelines tailored to small businesses, small organizations on consent, anonymization, and data minimization would be extremely useful. Third observation is digital literacy. Every month, I offer several AI training courses to managers, municipal organizations, artists, restaurateurs, and hoteliers. And everywhere, I see the same phenomenon. Enthusiasm is immense, but practical knowledge is low. Employees use AI in their personal lives, but rarely in a structured setting at work. Without training and support, AI risks being misused or not used at all. Fourth thing, the transformation of search engines into AI engines creates a new challenge of digital discoverability. Companies are now wondering how to be visible in ChatGPT, Perplexity, or Gemini, and how their content is cited or not by these platforms. The lack of transparency complicates the tasks for small businesses who simply want to exist in this evolving ecosystem. Finally, a proportionate compliance framework is needed. The AI that small businesses are using today is mainly used to write text, respond to customers, automate administrative tasks, or create visuals. These are low-risk uses. Regulation should therefore be gradual, heavy and strict for systems with societal impact, but simple, pragmatic, and accessible for everyday use of small organizations' businesses. Small businesses want to adopt AI, but they don't want to be left to their own devices. They need a clear framework, adequate support, and tools adapted to their reality. Regulations must protect Canadians while allowing small businesses across the country to innovate, remain competitive, and take full advantage of this technological revolution. Thank you very much, and I would be more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalo, for your opening remarks. We will now move to Ms. Bednar.
To address the committee, please start.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. By way of a brief introduction, I'm the Managing Director of the Canadian Shield Institute for Public Policy and co-author of The Big Fix, How Companies Capture Markets and Harm Canadians. My work focuses on market power, technology, and economic sovereignty. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Matthew Demota. His work explores how technologies shape information and knowledge environments, particularly AI, and the implications for national security and sovereignty. He's also a leader in the AI standardization community in Canada. You heard that it's his first appearance at committee. I hope it will not be his last. Canada has been talking seriously about AI regulation for the better part of a decade now. And yet, while we've been mostly debating privacy, consent, and data collection frameworks, AI hasn't been waiting for us, hasn't been waiting for businesses either. The technologies are already being deployed, shaping markets, shaping culture, and economic outcomes in real time. And much of the regulatory conversation to date has treated AI primarily as a data governance problem. That focus is important, but it's no longer sufficient because what we're now facing isn't speculative or hypothetical. It is a present-day deployment challenge. We're regulating live use cases, and at least that's how we think we need to start approaching this. Here's some of what we've been studying at SHIELD. AI-generated music and cultural production that cannot be reliably distinguished without disclosure. Earlier today at Little Victories, my coffee, I was surprised to learn, was sponsored by Spotify. I wonder why. Algorithmic and personalized pricing in housing, groceries, ticketing, insurance, and elsewhere. And autonomous and agentic payment systems are beginning to transact without direct human initiation. What does that mean for the future of e-commerce and the discoverability of businesses, big and small? None of these challenges map directly or neatly or perfectly on a simple privacy and consent framework. They're about market governance. They blend consumer protection, competition, labor, and financial oversight. And they're about how power is exercised through automated systems in everyday life. So if we have a gap today as a country, it's mostly that we've been reluctant to take clear positions on how AI is already being used and how it should maybe be constrained in practice. Let me just expand on those three more concrete live use cases. Culture and CanCon. You know that Canada recently updated its Canadian cultural guidelines, its framework, to say that AI-generated material does not count as CanCon. But we did not take that extra step of clarifying what AI-generated material should count as. What is it? How should it be labeled? How should human creators be protected in markets that are now saturated with synthetic output? We have a regulatory vacuum in one of the country's most sensitive sovereignty domains. Second, algorithmic pricing. Automated pricing systems are shaping and reshaping rent, tickets, groceries, consumer credit, all sorts of places. And the Competition Bureau's forthcoming study in this arena is a crucial step forward. The challenge here is not just price discrimination, it's the normalization of machine-optimized extraction from households at scale. We care about the cost of living in Canada. We have to care about this practice. Third, I just want to point to payments and financial autonomy. As AI systems begin to initiate transactions autonomously, which is interesting from a consumer protection and competition standpoint, we need to ask whether existing Bank Act principles like fairness, non-discrimination, explainability, and regulatory oversight apply. If machines are transacting, then the governance expectations have to follow that transaction, not the interface. I'll also note one element of caution in the broader economic narrative. We're being told that AI will rescue our productivity rut if only adoption moves fast enough. Yet the evidence there remains highly mixed. Many enterprise deployments fail. Some controlled studies show that productivity losses occur rather than the gains that have been promised. And yes, AI may well transform parts of our economy, but it would be a mistake to predicate Canada's entire growth strategy on unproven assumptions. If we overpromise and then undergovern, the public's going to pay twice. Once through disrupted labor markets and again through weakened consumer protections. In closing, AI regulation cannot remain anchored primarily in upstream debates about data collection alone. We have to regulate the downstream power that is already observable, how systems shape and reshape prices, wages, transactions, culture, information, and access to opportunity. The technology is at work, and the question before this committee is whether governance can catch up. Thank you. We look forward to your questions.
Ms. Bednar, appreciate your opening statement. We're going to start with our 6-minute rounds of questions, and Mr. Barrett is going to kick things off. Go ahead, Mike.
Ms. Bednar, from your perspective as someone who studies digital market failures and governance, what is the single biggest structural weakness in Canada's current AI strategy, and what's the effect of that on public accountability but also on our economic sovereignty?
Thank you for a wonderful and challenging question in terms of a big weakness overall. I think it's very obvious that we're treading so carefully on not wanting to infringe upon or impede innovation, right? And in 1999, the U.S. took an explicit policy position around permissionless innovation that Canada tacitly kind of echoed, right? Where we sort of said, let's step back, let's take our hands off the wheel, let's throw spaghetti at the wall. And right now, we're most of the time like trying to scrape some of that tomato sauce off the wall, right? And that's why it's been so challenging for us to bring forward a big tech accountability agenda. So I think our biggest constraint is that tension between feeling like any market intervention around governance and guardrails is seen or interpreted as impeding innovation and subsequent growth.
So what should it look like? What should those guardrails look like? I'm not sure. Did you have the opportunity to see any of the previous committee hearings or see any of the testimony from our most recent meeting, for example?
No, we looked a little bit at who was appearing
Okay.
and kind of into companies and background.
I didn't want to, it's not required watching or homework, though I do encourage all Canadians to regularly watch the proceedings of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. However, the question that I posed, I have posed to other witnesses, is the challenge, the instinct is for regulation and put up as many guardrails as we can, prevent the runaway freight train of AI superintelligence, and everything will then be okay. Of course, that has to be done in concert with peer countries, even a global compact. But if you have any other actors, let's say bad actors, who are the state sponsors currently of cyber attacks on Canada, how are we able to balance regulation while also allowing ourselves to progress? Because we're going to need to deploy AI in some form, I would expect, to defend against AI weapons.
One thing that we're trying to do in one, or historically have tried to do in one piece of legislation, is regulate both the composition of these systems and their application, right? So you can view that as an opportunity to separate some of those thoughts, which is why we're putting forward, let's also use cases to understand where and how is this technology being disruptive or deceiving people, right? Where do we not understand where it is and how is it distorting markets? And the second kind of fundamental challenge for Canada is how in complementary legislation, not legislation, but trade agreements, we're constrained through the digital chapter in CUSMA from achieving what many people would want us to be able to do. For instance, mandate data residency or audit algorithms, right, to even try to start to understand them. We cannot do that. We're constrained. So as we look forward in terms of what we want to be able to do when it comes to interpreting and understanding and appreciating and governing, right, or having the right oversight or auditability of those algorithmic systems, we are currently unable to do that.
How much time do I have?
2 minutes.
What would institutional reforms need to look like that would insulate our AI oversight as a country from political cycles or inconsistency or let's just say knowledge deficits at the political level. For example, a minister responsible for artificial intelligence is a new thing. And so what is the mandate of that minister? What's that ministry responsible for? Well, that's going to evolve and change and cycle in and potentially cycle out with changes in the ministry, in the federal cabinet. How do we insulate against the cyclical nature of the political element so that we have consistency and stable regs?
I mean, I wonder if there you want to start with just the principle of knowability, right? When a system is being used or deployed, or for instance, businesses and governments, when you interact with a chatbot, the fact that a chatbot, and it's very dude, where's my jetpack, right? In terms of what we were going to get with AI. We've got a lot of chatbots. That's interesting and kind of can save money on customer service. Put that aside. Should a chatbot be able to, frankly, masquerade or deceive people as if they're human? It can be very confusing for people when I think that I'm chatting with, like, Mark at Canadian Tire or something, and it's a computer system, right? And when you're chatting with a chatbot and it's from the government of Canada and you're asking it questions about the immigration system, you may think that you are speaking, with an agent or something like that. So again, that principle right now, we lack knowability a lot of the time. And that's why I brought up music, because synthetic audio is basically impossible for us to detect when you're hearing a fake song. And that sucks.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sure that'll get recorded in the blues. That sucks. You can say it. It's all good. Monsieur Sarré, vous avez 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Commencez.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I found your opening remarks very interesting, and they very much align with our study. I find our study very relevant, especially given that we're at a turning point where we need to protect Canadians, but we also need to ensure that we don't hinder the digital economic growth in Canada. Canada is a pioneer in this field, and it's important to note that. I heard you mention culture and generative AI, using it for creating music or content. When we want to put in control mechanisms, I have certain concerns. Do we put measures in place regarding training these systems, or do we try to control the use? Because we're talking about Canadians using AI. So we can talk about personal use or organizational use, public use. What are we talking about when we're talking about these measures in order to control AI? And how should we do that? Is it doable? Perhaps we'll start with Mr. Gonzalo. Mr. Gonzalo, please. That is an excellent question. I'm not an expert on legislation, but if we're talking about global platforms, I do believe that Canada has a role to play regarding a user's use. It'll be difficult to put control measures on OpenAI and Microsoft and other businesses of this sort. It's very difficult to control businesses, as we tried to do with Google and Meta with C18 at the time, if I remember correctly. In an ideal world, is that something we would want to do? Yes, but feasibility would be very difficult. We can look at the control of its use, or at least define the playground within which Canadians can use the tools. And that's what I stated in my opening remarks. What do we allow? And we need to educate people regarding what can be done, what should or shouldn't be done. I think that's our role to play there. Thank you.
Address that, Ms. Bednar, Mr. Demota.
To say that, with the application of generative elements, just to bring it back to culture, we are also seeing that it's not something markets really want. So iHeartRadio recently announced that they will not play any music that has a synthetic component or is synthetically generated. We saw during the Oscars that moviegoers were offended that someone had, vocal coaching that was synthetic or the background of a movie. So we're starting to see, again, outside of more formal regulations, what markets, what people actually want and don't want. And I do think when it comes to the application of that material, that's very important to pay attention to, because we have a responsibility, governments have a responsibility to do hard and difficult things. And that's why the government has also been studying copyright and AI and also where that value is created. I know that companies like OpenAI want us to think that it's very difficult to govern them, but it doesn't have to be that way.
J'aimerais bien continuer de parler de OpenAI, mais j'ai quand même
I'd
une
like
autre
to continue speaking on OpenAI, but I do have another question on culture, Quebec culture. I understand some of the challenges regarding educating Canadians and ensuring that they understand. I think that a lot of people don't know that they're listening to music that was created by AI, whether it be on Spotify, and all algorithms will focus on AI-generated music, and same for YouTube. Do you believe that education for Canadians would be more efficient than governing?
This isn't an education failure. It's impossible. It's intentional deceit. It is companies who want to extract value from real artists and musicians who have already depreciated the payouts that they receive and are training computer systems. I mean, calling it AI sometimes makes it a bit fancier than it is. Actively training systems to then take artists and real bands out of the equation altogether and earn more for themselves on this fake music. I find it deeply offensive that we can be, in elevators, at work, listening to music, in a hotel room, and listening to something that's frankly not real. It's just a bunch of sounds.
I like your word, fake music. There's a new word you can use now, the fake music. Mm-hmm. Is it generative music? You call that fake music?
It fake news. It's fake music, right? It's fake sounds. Yeah. It's fake.
Mais si je peux me permettre...
Oui, rapidement, s'il vous plaît. Oui.
Briefly, please, go ahead. There is algorithms, of course, on Netflix. About 70% of content is proposed to Canadians, and on Spotify, algorithms go according to our tastes in making recommendations. We need to be aware of the strength of these algorithms that have a role to play in all of that. Thank you.
I was hoping to have a synthetic music career, but that may not work now. Monsieur Thériault, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Thériault, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. My question, and I will be making a reference to something that was written by Mr. Gonzalo, but I will be asking the question to all the witnesses. In an article on your blog, you mentioned this year that there was an increase, a significant increase in the use of AI for doing research. A lot of people stated using AI in order to get information first. Last year it was 5% of Canadians. Now it is 12%, so that is a significant increase for search engines. And it shows the increase of AI use in our daily lives. Seeing such an increase brings a few concerns. One of my concerns has to do with biases caused by AI. We have to know who is responsible for these biases in algorithms and search results. We don't know. When we talk about biases in AI, we talk about biased results or data that is falsified that is used to train AI, and this can lead to very negative impacts. When we don't deal with these biases, it hinders people's ability to participate in society. This has an impact throughout society and on businesses, whether it be regarding recommendations, content recommendations, creating echo chambers. It could have an impact on credit and loans. How can we ensure that this does not mislead people, that these biases do not mislead people? May I respond? Mr. Gonzalo, yes, please go first. You have raised the issue of biases and hallucinations. These are two factors that we don't have solutions for. We know that big AI companies state that they are working on solving these issues, but the issue still stands. If there's a way for government to ensure compliance with these businesses, is by ensuring transparency and opening up this black box. Currently, we don't understand the mechanisms that are used. There's information on Canadians and Quebecers regarding where they are seeking to travel to, and people use AI tools in order to save money when they travel, to tell them where to go, and the report that you quoted was published in September, and from one year to the next, there are significant increases in the use of AI in their daily lives. Yes, Google is the main search engine, but do we know how Google's algorithm works for giving results? No. And with AI, we are receiving sources, but we don't know how the tool was trained. And that leads to problems because a business might not understand why they're not showing up in search results, and that causes problems. You can have a list with hundreds of results and 2 or 3 suggestions made, and this can have an impact on businesses who don't know why they haven't shown up. I don't have an answer to that, but Mr. Theriault, I know that Mr. Demoda would also like to respond if you wanted to give him the time.
Thank you for the question. This is an extremely concerning question that I've been working on for a few years, the question of how AI will impact research in general, especially Canadian research institutions. It's what we would call, and what we're sort of working on under the term epistemic sovereignty, which is the ability of a country or a community to be able to control the knowledge environment and how knowledge is produced. And that's an important question not only for researchers in the sciences or humanities, but also for people working in government, for businesses. How do you translate information into knowledge and then into action in the world? This is a huge concern. We don't know how a lot of these models are trained exactly. We don't necessarily know what kind of data they're being trained on. There have been many examples of intentional insertion of certain types of data to skew results towards one narrative or another. These are all major concerns. It's also, in terms of how we could govern this, I think what we need to do is we need to think first about what do we want our knowledge environment to look like. And this is what I would say across the board on what we're doing with AI. What do we actually want the results to look like? What are the long-term goals? And then come up with solutions based on that. Part of that would be thinking about the kinds of monopolies that control our information environment and our knowledge environment. This is very obvious in the sort of big tech sector, but in the research sector in particular, there are only a few companies. They're all multinationals. None of them are Canadian companies that own the vast majority of academic copyright. And they also are developing AI tools to access and process that information from that copyright. So this is what our entire research and education system is built on at the university level, and this is a major concern.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Demota. Merci, Monsieur Thériault. Je m'excuse
Thank you,
aussi.
Mr. Thériault, and apologies, Mr. Gonzalo. I had to interrupt you because I did know that somebody else wanted to answer the question, and I want to apologize for cutting you off.
For 5 minutes, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I'm going to ask a fairly broad, high-level question to both witnesses because other jurisdictions are a lot further ahead when it comes to regulation, and there's a vacuum here. And in that sense, there's a debate, obviously, about to what extent, in broad terms, regulation should be grounded based upon the precautionary principle to everything to post-deployment monitoring. So we can look to the EU with their Artificial Intelligence Act, which has had a challenging rollout, arguably, in terms of being critiqued as overly burdensome, with overly high compliance costs, arguably C27, the Canadian model that never came to be, was more restrictive than the EU insofar as the EU model, the EU Act, has greater carve-outs. The UK regulatory framework is a little more flexible, and then there's the US approach, and there are others. But there are ranges there. So I'd be just, in very broad terms, interested in your comments on some of the pros and cons of regulations imposed in other jurisdictions.
Of course, and I will turn it to Matthew. I'll just share that something I've been noticing is the language around regulatory harmonization being used now, and I think it's kind of the new way we signal a kind of deregulation or lower regulatory environment, and it's a way to sort of suggest to Canada that because we don't have, our own path forward, we should continue to kind of wait and to follow others. But yes, there are other models that are instructive in various ways.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say is the idea that regulation kills innovation. I think there's a lot of evidence that shows the contrary, or at least shows that it's a far more complicated question than that. I think in the EU AI Act context, some of the things that are prohibited are things like, active, subliminal, or manipulative kind of AI, biometric categorization by race, things that I think we mostly can agree are probably unacceptable things. And so the fact that companies are saying that that's too high of a burden is a little concerning, because either they're developing tools that want to do these things, or they're just trying to kind of open up space to be able to do whatever they want. In terms of pros and cons, I think Canada, in some ways, we're behind the United States and other leading countries on, in terms of commercializing AI in the leading companies. We still have probably the best, or one of the best, research environments for AI and other sciences in general. And I would say we can lead in many ways, and I think a great pro of thinking about the right kind of regulation is that we could lead on developing the kind of AI that people actually want to use, the actual kind of safe, useful AI that can be used across all different areas in very specific domains or more generally. And I think that's a huge pro to any kind of regulation.
Mr. Gonzalo?
Écoutez, de ma perspective, moi, c'est un peu...
That's what I mentioned earlier. I think that we can't be against regulation, but what I would recommend, and in discussions that I've had with businesses, we looked at a potential regulation that could be gradual, because there are larger organizations that are using AI at a larger scale. And implementing legislation, a blanket legislation, could be problematic. I do think that there should be some kind of legislation, but it cannot have a scope that is too large.
Mr. Cooper, merci, Mr. Gonzalo. Ms.
Thank you,
Church,
Mr. Gonzalo.
minutes, go
Thank
ahead,
you,
please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I would just say to Ms. Bednar, with the big fix, thank you for writing that. I would consider that a must read. So just to commend your book, excellent public policy perspective on many of these issues. I would like to ask you specifically about the concept of algorithmic pricing, because I think it is actually new for a lot of us. And we are, as consumers, already familiar with examples of surge pricing or variable pricing when we purchase an airline ticket, for example. So why should we be more worried about algorithmic pricing? How is AI changing the way businesses set prices for consumers today? And then my follow-up to that is going to be, what are the ways then that we can help protect consumers, their privacy, and their pocketbooks?
One of the reasons I think we should care about algorithmic pricing is because it's a form of personal pricing, right? Personalized pricing that can be interpreted as being inherently discriminatory. So yes, there are lots of places in the economy where we've come to accept price volatility. We all might drive around to a different gas station because we can see that the price has changed daily, but we can all see the same price. What personalized pricing does is each of us might see a different price for the same item. We're actually seeing Target and Walmart in the U.S. have stopped, in some instances, even putting price labels on their shelves saying that they can't keep up with tariffs and all those other price changes, and you don't find out what the price is until you go to the checkout. Loyalty programs are closed pricing ecosystems where you and I might see and get a different discount. That's a different form of pricing designed to incentivize us to purchase certain things based on our past purchasing behavior, but it also means that accessibility to, say, coupons that we all used to get in the newspaper, where we could all get the same discount on our milk or, diapers, be they for your baby or for yourself, could be kind of equally accessed. That's changing. And you don't have to be a big company to do it. You don't have to be the biggest on the block. It is a practice that firms of all sizes, probably because we have kind of these legislative rule vacuums, take into account. And one of the more kind of insidious ones that I've come across is, the Taco Bell app can start to infer or learn when your payday might be because of the, cookies. Again, these are data-hungry surveillance environments. And my Gordita deal is more expensive every other Friday. So the people who end up being taken most advantage of, again, it may be at the margins, it may seem like small sums, it really adds up. And again, back to that, when I said before, it sucks. This sucks too. And back to that element of knowability, it's very difficult to discern when it happens. Years ago, Amazon stopped having prices on their holiday gift guide, right? Remember getting like the Eaton's catalog and like folding pages or peeking at your mom's Victoria's Secret? Yeah, there aren't prices now when it comes to the Amazon catalog, because you and I might see a different price based on the time of day, based on our geography, based on the devices that we're using. And that price is not to give us the best possible discount. It's to extract as much value as possible.
So then I take it from that our legal frameworks right now are insufficient. So how do we get to the bottom of this? How do we make sure that a business isn't setting a personalized price on a discriminatory basis based on what they can infer, presumably, of my background, my financial situation, my geography, this whole constellation of data points that they presumably have access to now through AI?
A lot of it comes back to knowability. I mean, of course, I'll defer to and look forward to the Competition Bureau's forthcoming study on algorithmic pricing. We did see that the RealPage case, which was studied more in the U.S. than here, we sort of said there wasn't enough evidence that a software program was being used to drive up rents, right, for apartment buildings that were owned. But again, it's a reminder that you don't have to be the largest firm to use software like this that could be collusive. Canadians, I think, are still reeling from bread price fixing. I think right now you can still get like a $20 or $25. There's a different class action lawsuit or something. I'm going to have to Google that. But this again, software systems, computer programs can allow this to happen. There's more models in the U.S., often at the state level. New York just introduced new legislation related to that kind of pricing that mostly has to do with disclosure, and there have been other proposals to just ban it entirely. Again, you could argue there are instances where it's preferable or desirable, but again, it's fundamentally an extractive process, not one that's really about rewarding your loyalty.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you, Ms. Church. Monsieur Thériault, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît. Commencez.
Oui, merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I had forgotten to turn off my microphone. I would like to come back to what I was asking earlier, and perhaps Mr. Demoda will be able to continue with his response, and same for Mr. Gonzalo. Some experts have said that AI can share false information, and that fact has doubled in a year. And in the race for performance, tech giants have made their AI more useful by connecting it to the web in real time. And AI is thus exposed to an environment that is polluted, and they can't make the difference between what is fake and what is real, and shares false information that seems factual. AI, in responding to everything, has become one of the biggest vectors for disinformation. Is that not concerning, and what can we do?
Peut-être en premier, monsieur.
I'll start perhaps with you, Mr. Demoda, and then Mr. Gonzalo.
Yes, thanks. Thank you very much for the question. I think this is extremely concerning, and it's a potential. There's potential to have it be a sort of supercharging of disinformation. There's obviously the targeted poisoning attacks of LLMs, where you essentially put material out in the internet to intentionally be trolled by these large data collection processes in order to create certain narratives within large language models that will be then spit out for specific purposes, for propaganda purposes. But the actual just day-to-day incorrect information that AI can generate, and even more than just the hallucinations, which Mr. Gonzalo mentioned before, where it just gives the wrong information, there is this question of sycophancy as well. So the model will, when you speak with it, especially as it learns your personality and kind of collects information on you, it will tell you that your ideas are the most brilliant ideas ever. It will sort of follow what you have to say. It will support your ideas and kind of push that forward, which might feel nice to have a kind of friendly conversant who's supportive of your ideas, but it's led to significant, there's been a lot of reporting in the United States over the last year on this, significant mental health issues as well. And that can also lead to political violence and sort of siloing within the political environment. So I think all of this is extremely concerning, and it's sort of it's a disinformation and misinformation crisis without a clear center. The center is obviously the companies themselves, but there's not necessarily someone who is trying to push a certain narrative forward all the time. It's just the models themselves allowing people to follow their own, sort of go down their own rabbit hole of information, which is very, very concerning for social cohesion.
Je renchéris.
I would like to add to what was just said by saying that this issue is not exclusive to AI. It was an issue that existed before, and it comes from those bot farms and what we see on social media. Disinformation on X, on Instagram, YouTube. So for the Googles and the Metas of the world, we have to look at how they put in place mechanisms to control all that. That's where we can find the issue and the solution, and we need to see how we can frame all of that. AI is also a bit of a victim, even though they have ways to detect that content has been generated by a bot or that it's artificial. But this goes beyond governing AI. It has to do with the digital environment in its entirety. That's how I would reframe the question that has been asked. What then would be some tools in order to solve that issue? There must be tools. Platforms are attempting to do that. For YouTube, for example, you have to say that content that was shared was generated by AI. We're supposed to be transparent, but it always relies on people's goodwill to do that. So for a tool, we could perhaps force that. And we're supposed to be 13 years and over to have a social media account, but that's not always the case. And some countries are starting to legislate in order to better manage these tools. And so perhaps we need to force these platforms to integrate their own terms and conditions. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalo. Thank you, Mr. Thériault. Mr. Gonzalo, can you unplug and replug your microphone, please? The sound was not very good. Are you hearing me now? It seems to be better now. Thank you.
Mr. Gill. You have 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So these days, the AI emerging very fast. My question, what will be the effect of the AI on the job market? So will AI create more jobs or replace them? So, and which specific jobs are most at the risk from the AI?
Microsoft that put out a report around some of the top jobs that are likely to be kind of displaced or eroded. You've hit on the core challenge, right, that labor economists have been looking at. To what extent is this technology complementary to existing jobs and sort of enhancing? Does it take away some of the drudgery work and kind of let people focus on bigger skills? Or is it displacing, right, and we see elimination? Some of the data we've been looking at when we look at the labor market for new grads, young people between 18 and 25. I mean, we know that they're having one of the toughest times in the labor market than even before the 90s. And we are seeing, some early evidence that firms have chosen to take on, again, AI as a productivity enhancing tool as a substitute for training a young person. So when we think about, our economy in 8 or 10 years, though I'd love to come back every December 3rd to committee, I hope that I wouldn't have to testify about losing a layer of our labor market, not having senior engineers or senior writers or senior policy thinkers because we didn't bother to invest in having junior ones because we wanted to squeeze out a little bit more productivity, right? And as we talk about the wartime efforts and wartime investments that Canada has to make, I think that we're going to have to think really seriously about other ways to support and stimulate smaller companies to train new grads, right? Because it is costly. And we do have some programs for that and funding that people can access. But really, a goal for Canada should be that our young people, our youth employment, and by the way, I'm the former chair of the expert panel on youth employment, that we have meaningful, credible opportunities for young people to show off the skills that they already have instead of over focusing on the supply of labor and the skills that they have, and recognize that the demand for labor may be fundamentally changing.
So my next question is, these days there are so many self-driving cars in the market, right? So who is responsible if a self-driving car causes an accident? And should humans still learn how to drive if cars become fully automated?
Bruce Holsinger has a wonderful book called Culpability. It was one of Oprah's book club's picks this summer that sort of starts to help explore that. We've seen in many instances, recorded instances, where a self-driving vehicle has been in an accident that the software actually turns itself off a second or milliseconds before the point of collision. This allows companies to skirt culpability and say that the driver was actually at fault. Again, this is an instance where we have seen a computational system come to the market, not fully tested, but rather like these other generative systems we've been talking about, relying on us as user testing. So right now I would say that yes, there are self-driving vehicles on the market as moderated by our provincial vehicular standards around where they can be. But as for the credibility of the software and safety, I think we are all, when we get into a vehicle like that, we are testing it.
So, like, there will be too much dependency on the artificial intelligence, right? In our social structure, so how it will affect the humans will be socially isolated if they use the artificial intelligence?
Well, we're seeing some studies right now, just to go back to some of Matthew's earlier points around our post-secondary system and the strength of that system and the source of Canadian pride that we have. We're seeing evidence when students, young people, and workers of all kinds are using these algorithmic systems to do their work or support their work, right? That they retain only about 20% at best, so 1/5 of the information, right? They don't even actively remember what they were writing, that it decreases brain activity. So I would put aside kind of social isolation and think about, this myth that this technology can help us be self-driving as humans or sort of take away our agency or that there are shortcuts to things. I may not have had the opportunity to study closely the previous testimony of the guests and witnesses that you've had, but I'm not going to show up here with material that an algorithmic system has generated and not take the time to put my own thoughts together, And I mean, that's one of the core questions we sort of have when it comes to not just outsourcing the labor and work of thinking, but are we going to need to think about, like we did in the 90s when we knew that labor was being actively offshored, are we seeing instances where labor is now going to be, AI offshored and the job isn't actually going anywhere else? It's kind of going to a computer program.
Thank you, Ms. Bednar. Thank you, Mr. Gill. Mr. Saini, for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for coming. I'm going to talk a little bit different issue. We had witnesses who said the uncontrollable use of AI could be a danger to a country's sovereignty. Countries like Russia, China, India, USA are preparing those things. Could you elaborate on that part of it?
So, if I understand the question correctly, you're asking about potentially adversarial countries using powerful AI systems to undermine our sovereignty. I mean, thank you for the question. I think in one way, AI is kind of the ultimate underminer of sovereignty, potentially, right? The way that you use it, the way that it processes information is very unaccountable, especially the way that we govern it currently. I think in terms of attacks from China, Russia, other countries, there is certainly speculation that AI systems can be used to enhance cyber weapons, for example, and other kind of attacks like that. It's been used extensively, certain AI systems, to find vulnerabilities in computer systems, for example. There are lots of papers and discussions that speculate on how AI can enable different weapons, including CBRN, like radiological, biological, chemical weapons, and so on. Whether that's an imminent threat, I think there's always an imminent threat. I spoke to an expert once who worked in the nuclear space who said we're always about 10 seconds away from being able to have a significant cyber attack against a grid in a major country or in a major sector of a country. So I think cyber attacks are always a significant risk. Whether AI makes that more possible or less possible, I'm not 100% certain as of right now.
Mr. Gonzalo, would you be able to share your viewpoint on that?
C'est une excellente question, mais
That's a great question. But in all honesty, I agree with Mr. Demoda. The issue that I see is that in Canada, we don't have an application. In France, they have Mistral. We don't have an LLM platform here, which hosts our data that we would be responsible for. Now, regarding imminent attacks and the use of AI, I wouldn't have anything to add because that is not my field of expertise.
Ms. Bender, in your opening remarks, you said there is also loss of production in some part of the industries. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Or which industries are the one which, in your view, are suffering from the use of AI?
From the use. I mean, look, the applications of proprietary algorithmic systems can do really interesting and amazing things for supply chain optimization, right? Moving elements around, or sort of the ports work that we've seen in Quebec, I think is all really encouraging. I would say more that we need to be careful about being dazzled and impressed by successful applications of the technology, thinking that that means, you know, we should continue to hesitate when it comes to design. One of the things I mentioned that no one's asked me about, I mean, no hard feelings, but is, you know, that future of commerce, agentic payments, you know, asking essentially a chatbot, right? Asking a computer system to make a purchase on your behalf. What that could mean in terms of, back to not foreign interference, but large multinationals preferencing their own companies over our own, right? You mentioned, the other witness mentioned smaller companies being challenged with how Google search is changing and information asymmetries and their ability to even connect with customers. Well, if that ability to be discovered is becoming more dependent or interdependent on a model like ChatGPT to help you find a store, then that represents a real constraint in terms of access to markets for all kinds of businesses.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Saini. Mr. Barrett, for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Does corporate consolidation, Ms. Bednar, does that make it easier for Canada to regulate something like knowability as a right, to pick up where we left off before? This idea about the illusion of choice is something that you've talked about a lot in your writing, and I think that some of that is there's a little bit more transparency for those who are looking and for those who have been presented with that information. But does it make it easier if we're dealing with a smaller number of really big players who are controlling many things? Does that make it easier, or does that have the opposite effect? Is it a bigger challenge for us?
It is interesting to think about, when and is corporate consolidation a strength for Canada or an opportunity? You know, you could argue that having fewer large companies allows government to more quickly consult with them or sort of get their views. But in terms of business practices and sort of coordination in markets of all size, what we see is that the small and medium-sized players tend to mimic and adopt practices that the larger ones have.
Right.
So, you know, they may set the pace or sort of set the bar in terms of how AI is used, but actually data and information as a competitive advantage is something that we haven't been able to really grapple with through our competition law and really appreciate what that means for barriers to entry for new markets coming to Canada, such as when Canada potentially explored having a new grocery store. Remember, we did that very Canadian thing. We just asked really, really nicely. You know, lots of reasons for that. Part of it is geography and real estate, that most many large grocers are also, in the real estate business fundamentally. We also saw this with, say, the Bay. The former CEO of the Bay said, we are actually not a retailer, we're a real estate company. But through loyalty programs and the information profiles that they have on us, it allows them to, again, you could argue, manipulate or set markets in particular ways. So maybe it makes it more easy for them to control markets.
So I have a question for you, and it's not from me. It's from an AI model.
Okay.
I asked it what I should ask you.
Okay.
And I used a model I don't normally use for any purpose, so that it didn't have any or much context about me or why I'm asking you the question.
Okay.
The question it has, so I'm sure it's listening. Which widely believed narrative about AI in Canada do you think is most misleading right now, and what risks does that misconception create for policymakers or the public?
I've already touched on, thank you for the question to you and the AI system of your choice. I mean, I've already touched on that kind of false opposition of, any form of regulation is going to get in the way of innovation. I think something I come up against a lot in my research and my work is this idea that because there's not a government regulation, that a market is ungoverned or the market is more free. All markets have rules. The question is whether those rules have been democratically set and are transparent. And then, as you're saying, as you're trying to attract investment and say that companies should come here and compete, they know that they're going to have a fair shot. Or those rules can be set by private actors who become de facto regulators. And when that happens, as we've seen in digital markets, the rules are set in favor of the largest companies, right? And that's why so much of our e-commerce environment, which I think we sort of still idealize as a kind of free-ish market, are characterized by situations where large companies, but companies of all sizes, both own and operate in a marketplace, and that allows them to manipulate that marketplace. 48 cents, maybe 45 of every dollar by sellers, independent sellers earned on Amazon goes to Amazon. So again, when we look at those companies and say, well, man, why aren't they more productive? Why aren't they earning more? When half of every dollar of revenue you own is going to a kind of essentially junk fee that's been going up and up and up. Maybe that's something that's getting in the way. Is that a free market? I don't think so.
What's the solve for, like, what's the solution, or what is the policy proposal that you would recommend? Is this about awareness? Is the changing prices, are the changing prices in grocery stores based on the time of day, based on who is nearby? On sites like Amazon, my 5-year-old circled everything in the Amazon book.
Mr. Barrett,
my 12-year-old asked, well, how much does this one cost, because the price wasn't there.
So I just put in Copilot that, is Mr. Barrett's time up? And it said yes, it is. So
It was a hallucination. Time.
yes. So no, it wasn't.
I know.
Can we come back to you on that? Okay, thanks. Madame Lapointe, go ahead. Commencez, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for being with us today. This is all very interesting. Very interesting. Mr. Demoda, you said that regulation kills innovation. In the European Union, they have framed certain things, but they're going to be taking a step back, and I would like to know what you meant by that.
Apologies if it was unclear, but I meant the opposite, or I meant to say the opposite, that regulation does not kill innovation. So there's been a number of prominent studies that show that regulation not only, I mean, it can limit certain types of innovation in some contexts. Often it does not limit sort of the really big leap forward innovations that we see. What I think jurisdictions like Sweden, North Korea, for example, which are, I think, somewhat good comparisons for Canada, have shown is that really good regulation around making sure that we have guardrails for a certain type of technology can make sure that businesses know how they can innovate and know kind of the lanes that they need to follow, and then they're free to kind of do whatever they want. And a really great example of this would be in nuclear, right? Historically, Canada has had a really great nuclear sector, and it's because we had really great regulation. Other countries, including the United States, did not have that as much. They've had disasters, and their nuclear industry declined. I would also say that for AI, well, I'll leave it at that.
J'ai une question aussi pour...
I have a question for Mr. Gonzalo. You talked about having a gradual system for small and medium businesses compared to larger businesses, and what would your suggestions be for those different levels? Thank you for the question. We can't have universal regulation. What we often see with regulations, and I'll give you an example, in Quebec, Bill 25 on protecting personal information has good intentions, but what we're seeing is that small businesses don't know where to start, what should be on their websites, how to track personal information, and that compares to L'Auto-Québec, bigger companies that have teams that don't make the same use of privacy. That's what I mean. So having regulation that applies to larger businesses and small businesses. Do we go by the number of employees? That's where I was saying that there should be different levels. Thank you. And I would have a question that's open for all the witnesses. Canada is part of the National or International Security Institute, and how does this help with creating security standards throughout the world? Should we work internationally in order to govern and legislate?
Yeah, in terms of our participation, are you you're referring to the international network of AI safety institutes? Yeah, I think that work can be very important for things that are international. I think there are international risks. One thing that China and the United States have agreed on, not in a formal agreement, but they came to some agreement on, is that AI should not be in nuclear command and control and communications. I think that's a good thing that we can agree on internationally. There are high-risk areas. We should not be putting AI, and we need to have international agreements on that. I think certain things need to be addressed on a national level. There are certain challenges that are uniquely Canadian, or perhaps they're not uniquely Canadian, but we're the ones that are best suited to think about how to best address those in Canada, and we can be a sort of a beacon or an example for other countries, and we might be able to influence through that network, but we need to address them at home first.
Merci. Est-ce que Monsieur Gonzalo, vous avez quelque chose à ajouter?
Mr. Gonzalo, do you have anything to add? No, I completely agree with what Mr. Demota has said. The leadership role is good, and it is important for us to see what is being done elsewhere and to be well aware and see what our role can be. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done here in the country, and we can implement things according to what we are seeing elsewhere. Thank you to all the witnesses. Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. Mr. Thériault, you have 5 minutes, please. I forgot to turn on my mic. I have a question for Mr. Gonzalo. Billions of dollars are being invested in AI currently, but regardless of progress, there are still no increases in productivity. KPMG's report from last week states that they surveyed 753 business leaders throughout the country, and it indicated that 93% of them stated that their organization was using AI. That compares to 61% of businesses last year, and they concluded that only 2% stated that their organizations were seeing return on investment with generative AI. Developing such technologies takes time. Stephanie Terran, Assistant Director at KPMG, stated, "It takes time to adopt new technology and to see a return on investment." That said, the productivity decreasing means waiting for years before AI leads to added value. What do you think about that, and do you also find it concerning? Thank you for the question. That is a real issue. And there are two aspects to your question. There are significant investments, billions of dollars. That is one thing. Investments, whether it be in training AI or hosting these platforms, that's a real issue. Some may say that there's a bubble, but I wouldn't go that far, because that means that the bubble will burst. I don't think we're there yet, but the risk is a real one. But the report that you mentioned from KPMG, when the .com arrived 25, 30 years ago, well, the benefits were not felt overnight. There was a bubble in that case, yes. But beyond that, we needed to see how to integrate that new technology with that digital transformation. We're still talking about it 30 years later. So it is a lengthy process. AI goes beyond that because it has different functions: accounting, HR, marketing, customer service, culture. It really can have an impact on all areas of society. And so with businesses, it might not be working because they want the bells and whistles, they want to integrate it, they want to use Copilot, instead of saying, well, as a business, what can these tools bring? Some businesses do this work correctly, and they take the time to implement a pilot project and test integration, and they often see better results. We've noticed that a lot of integration that is done too quickly without an organizational reflection on that is less efficient. So it's not a bubble that is going to burst. Integration needs to be done, but there are risks with OpenAI and Google, and these companies want to, in a way, dominate AI. But the slowing of productivity in the country, how long is that going to take? Because this is a real issue. Absolutely. But we should ask that to ChatGPT and see what it would think about that. It is very difficult to answer such a question. There are certain indicators that can look at different trends, but we're looking at innovation here, and AI, and especially generative AI, is fundamentally changing our daily lives. And so it is very difficult. We know that it will increase productivity. Will it justify the investments? Will the return on investments be solidified? In the short term, it might be difficult to say yes. It most likely will be on the medium long term. And we can't not invest and still see those possibilities. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Thériault. Your 5 minutes are up. Mr. Cooper.
Go ahead. Je pense que si tu veux un
I
autre...
think that if you would like another round, we could give you 2 minutes and 30 seconds, Mr. Thériault.
Mr. Cooper, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask Mr. D'Amato to elaborate on a comment that he made earlier, which is, and if I misheard you, then please state so, but I understood that you said that regulations do not impede innovation. Did I hear that correctly?
Studies that in terms of innovation in technology, regulations do not necessarily impede innovation. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. There's no evidence that it is a sure thing that if we put in regulations that AI will be impeded in terms of innovation in Canada.
Yeah. You also noted that Canada really led the way and is a leader when it comes to research, but we haven't been such a leader when it comes to commercialization. We're certainly not a leader when it comes to adoption, far behind the United States. And I guess in sort of this broad debate about regulations, isn't there a real risk that taking a risk-averse approach is going to result in a regulatory framework that in some respects misses the boat in terms of actually addressing real risks, that in other words there's an overreach that is counterproductive and in the process stifles innovation, stifles commercialization, and stifles adoption, and as the rest of the world moves ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that every single regulation would be great. I think that world is possible, what you're saying. I would say all of the issues that you listed are happening right now in a world where Canada has no regulation. So clearly, in terms of adoption, being behind on adoption, in terms of being behind on Canadians trusting AI, which I think is a well-reasoned trust often. They don't know if they should trust these systems in their work. In terms of commercialization, in terms of Canada leading the way on research, but then not being able to commercialize, not being able to hold on to the IP, those are all issues that I think would have been solvable by making sure that, maybe not regulation, but making sure we had policy on holding on to IP, for example, that we fund with our own research funding, for example, over the last 30 years. So I think some regulations could miss the boat. I think in the EU AI Act, there's a focus on like number of flops for training, for example. So like the size of the database and the training run for an AI system. I think those kinds of regulations might miss the boat because a system, you might be able to, with new algorithms, train a system way easier on way less data, for example. So yeah, I think some of them might lock in certain things that would not be ideal. But I think actually what we're seeing is an economy and an ecosystem that is desperate for better guidance and better guidelines to help usher in use of these tools and development and innovation with these tools.
The other witness, does he have any comments?
Monsieur Gonzalo?
Mr. Gonzalo, sorry.
Merci. Écoutez, je suis
Thank you. I think that regulations don't hinder innovation. In fact, it allows us to have clear guidelines to better navigate the system. But there should be different levels for this legislation so that smaller players, and they represent a large part of our economy, so these mom and pop shops are often in regions. They shouldn't have legislation that is too strict.
Merci, Monsieur Gonzalo.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalo. Mr. Sari, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I will ask questions regarding innovation and whether or not it is hindered by regulation. Earlier, I had asked what regulations and governance we were talking about. Are we talking about regulation on the development of systems? And I thought I had understood from the witnesses that that's not possible or almost impossible. Are we talking about regulating the use of these tools and data? And I would like to understand, because I asked earlier whether or not we can control these learning models and LLM, and if so, please tell me how, because I had understood earlier that we couldn't. And my background in technology makes me feel like I don't understand how we could control all of this, especially with other countries where I cannot regulate. How can we do this? You're saying that, or rather, and I'm talking about how can we do this for developing systems? May I answer? Of course. I will let the other witnesses talk about LLM platforms. I think it would be very difficult to regulate what Anthropic and OpenAI can do. But when we're talking about finding a frame, consumers, Canadians, don't know what data. The interpreter regrets, but the sound is very poor. One moment, please. I stopped your time. We're having some technical difficulties again with the microphone. Mr. Gonzalo, can you hear me now? Is it all right? Please go again. You're talking about awareness, and when I put an Excel file in a chat box, but my question is simple. Can we have an impact on the development of these LLM models and these algorithms? Do we have that capacity? We could, well, rather, we can't even control what a user can do, but we can raise their awareness. Awareness, yes, but we can say to people what they can't or what they shouldn't do, because there could be data leaks, and then you could be in breach of certain legislation. But for LLM, I'll let the other witnesses respond.
I mean, why can't we fathom governing companies like OpenAI? Is it because they appear to be dominant? Is it because we're afraid of them bullying us? We see situations right now where Canadian publishers and authors are being bullied by Google, who's decided, so that they can innovate, to tie the practice of their indexing so you can show up in search. They're saying, if you want to show up in search, you have to let us take all the data on your site for our model. Is that something that, it's not something that we should say is inevitable and that we have to take. That is, I would argue, and I have argued this, is an abuse of their dominance and a practice that if we could signal in Canada that we won't let this happen, what innovation can we attract? Earlier I sort of said, back though I'm saying to you, oh, it's not inevitable. I was a bit of a Debbie Downer earlier. I pointed to that digital chapter in Kuzma and said, there's a lot of stuff there that constrains us. That actually is an opportunity for Canada. There's no better time when we think about our sovereignty. Is the real kind of quote-unquote enemy or sort of boogie person here, is it President Trump, or are we really talking about being subjugated by the Magnificent Seven companies, right? That is the opportunity for Canada to decide what markets we want to build and have here, and that's what we're going to do through regulation. And we need to do that without fear of that retaliation and retribution.
On se rejoint. Là, vous avez parlé, touché à un autre angle.
I agree. And here we're talking about data sovereignty, digital sovereignty. And regarding digital sovereignty, I completely agree, because we do have the capacity to do that. If we are sovereign, if we have some data sovereignty, then we can do all of these. And I'm wondering if we truly are in Canada. Currently, we don't have that digital sovereignty that we could have.
I mean, I think the whole challenge, a core challenge with the digital economy, is that with other products, we had standards and processes before they came to a marketplace, right? And when we saw the digital economy and mobile applications and websites, what was really cool and really exciting was that they could come to the market really quickly. And it meant that, app stores, Google's App Store and Apple's App Store, you could argue, are stronger regulators of the digital economy than states or, countries like Canada, right? Because they're deciding what comes to the marketplace and under what terms. So because of that, that is what helps create and exacerbate this gap between our legislative ability to sort of keep up and make sure that legislation and regulatory realities reflect reality, reflect what people are experiencing in their everyday lives. And perversely, when that doesn't happen, and it continues not to happen, and it feels like the state doesn't have our back as consumers, as citizens, you get worse trust and more unrest. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
That's okay, Ms. Bernard. Merci, Monsieur Sarré. Monsieur Thériault.
Thank you, Mr. Sarré. Mr. Thériault, you have the floor for 2 minutes and 30 seconds, followed by Ms. Church for 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and we will conclude after that. Mr. Thériault, I'll do my best. In October, the government launched a national sprint on AI to modernize Canada's AI strategy. It's led by a working group on AI strategy. The government will factor in the recommendations from that working group, but also the results of a public consultation to define its new and renewed strategy. The issue is that many experts are already contesting the results, and they say that this consultation is not very reliable. In an article in The Devoir from October 29th, it states, or Matt Hatfield states, that it is concerning. Some might have asked AI to produce certain information. He criticizes that government accepts anonymous response on its public consultation platform. The government is not doing its due diligence in seeing what Canadians think on AI. That's what he stated. And so we wouldn't truly understand the view on AI, and we would not fully understand the advantages and disadvantages of the technology. So it's possible that the results are biased. And should we exclude anonymous results from these public consultations? I'll start with Mr. Demoda.
I don't have a strong opinion on the anonymous submissions. Some people might want to remain anonymous for legitimate reasons, but it is a concern in terms of the quality of the input. I think a consultation, even if short, is better than nothing, but I think we need more than consultation, and I think that there needs to be more accountability in these kinds of consultations, so an ongoing process and discussion. Obviously, there's the working group, but I think that we can do better to have more engagement with different communities that are affected and experts as well simultaneously to try to have more input throughout these processes going forward. I don't know the details about...
Ouais. On parle tout de même en si peu de temps.
We're talking about 10,000 respondents. Mr. Gonzalo, for those anonymous results, that's never an ideal choice for a survey. There's quantitative and qualitative data. And there are a lot of studies and reports, and qualitative reports. And so anonymous responses online do have a certain value, but I think that we need to look at it as a whole. And so you'll have to weigh all of the data that you will receive. Thank you, Mr. Thériault and Mr. Gonzalo.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the point about the change that we've seen around standards and how we have struggled to adapt in many respects from an era of physical products. We've had witnesses to the committee here who've offered a couple of different perspectives, particularly around the issue of liability. On the one hand, some witnesses who've spoken to existing laws being able to be interpreted to adjust for AI and digital platforms and some of the harms that we've talked about today. We've had others who have said that more specific laws may be useful here, even if it is difficult to capture a general purpose AI system for the harms that a different user might explore or experience using that platform. What's your perspective? How should we be looking at some sort of greater form of liability for an AI system? And where can we look to for guidance on the type of framework we should create to capture that?
I think it's very important. In something I wrote earlier this year, I sort of said, like, if the toaster burns you, if like something happens, like you have recourse, right? You have like warranty, you can sue, there are standards. But what do you do when a chatbot encourages you to hurt yourself or hurt someone else? So that question of liability probably comes back to a lot of the platform regulation questions that have been so difficult for Canada, again, because through trade law we enshrined the U.S.'s Section 230, and we've sort of accepted that it's very difficult or not appropriate for us to hold digital platforms accountable for the material that they put forward. And now with LLMs, we see this accelerated. In terms of jurisdictions for inspiration, I don't know if I should turn it to you if you just want to jump in.
Yeah, in terms of specific jurisdictions, I don't know if there's an example that I could jump to right away. One suggestion that I've heard previously is to attach training to licensing programs like engineering. Make sure that there's a licensed engineer in the jurisdiction attached to training or attached to deployment that makes sure that that person now takes on liability for the deployment of that tool. So that's one example, making sure that you are ensuring that individuals involved in the development and deployment of these tools are actually going to be held accountable under existing programs like licensing and so on.
All right, thank you, Ms. Church. I do want to say to the members of the committee, and I made this point the other night, I think it's critical that we get the minister in front of this committee. We have, through the clerk, have reached out to him and his office 11 times. We got the final answer on Monday that he wasn't going to appear before the committee. So I'm really encouraging members of the Liberal Party to get the minister here. I think it's a critical step. We've heard a lot of great information as a result of this study, and I think the minister needs to come before this committee and answer questions on not just some of the things that we've heard, but in terms of other issues related to his mandate. So I'm extremely disappointed that we have not been able to get the minister here. And Madame Lapointe, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this, please.
Oui, je crois qu'il est déjà en comité présentement.
I think that he will be traveling next week for the G7, and that's why he can't be here.
11 times we've asked him to come before this committee, and each time he's not been able to do that. So I don't know. Okay, so please encourage him to come. We're going to be continuing this study for a bit more, perhaps after we come back. But we need the minister here, and we can't have no as an answer. Okay, so I want to thank our witnesses, Ms. Bendar, Monsieur Garolo, Dr. Demota, for coming here today. You've really added a lot of value to this study, and Dr. Demota, for your first time here. We appreciate your expertise on this issue. And Ms. Bednar, if you want to mark your calendar for December 3rd, 2026, we'll be glad to have you back in another year. So, okay, that's all I have for today. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.